Hi, I'm Garrett Boatman. You may know me as the author of Stage Fright, originally published by Onyx in 1988, reissued as Paperback from Hell, number 11 by Valancourt Books. I got some new books coming out, including Night's Plutonian Shore from J. Ellington Ashton Press. Today, I want to read the opening scenes from Floaters, my 1890s Victorian novella, coming from Bram Stoker award-winning Crystal Lake Publishing, September 10. Floaters features fierce rivals, Victorian hooligan youth gangs banding together to save London from a plague of the living dead. Floaters, Chapter 1. The swells were drunk. There were 3 of them, young toffs, their fine suits looking worse for wear after a night of East End carousing, still joking and pulling at a shared bottle as the wherry made its way upriver. Midnight was long past, and dawn too far off for Jenkins' taste. Father Thames was in a foul mood. Night was thickest on the Surrey side, the glassworks and wharves invisible behind the greasy banks of fog. On the city side, the electric lights of the Temple Pier and Victoria Embankment glowed through the murk like will-o'-the-wisps. Despite the dark and the fog, old Clarence Jenkins, who had been dipping his oars in these muddy waters since before the great stink, knew every dock and water stair on both sides of the river, and could find his way blindfolded. He loved the dear old cantankerous river and all its lights, and liked to think of it as his. But lately, the relationship had soured. He wanted to attribute his failing affection for the river to age. He was getting on, and the damp aggravated his rheumatism. That wasn't it. Distrust had set in. Though it had never happened to him personally, he imagined it was like knowing your wife's cheating on you and not being able to prove it, but deep down, knowing. Not that Beth would ever, and who would have her? His oars dipped and rose and dipped, and the wherry glided in little sprints. Temple Pier's lights grew brighter. Lately there was gossip. Tales of disappearances. A colleague, Tom Button, had gone missing last week, along with the 2 couples he was rowing over from Southwark to Waterloo Pier. Vanished. No bodies found. The boat was discovered mired in the mud past Blackfriars. A gentleman's coat and a lady's purse were all that was found of his fare. Clarence had seen the police in their steamers and longboats out searching, plying their lamps over the water. They told the watermen to take care, of what they declined to say. Only, keep a sharp eye, and if you see anything unusual, do not investigate, but pull hard till you've left whatever it was behind. Had some strange fish inhabited the Thames? Some behemoth from the ocean's depths, trying its luck at fresher waters? He had once seen a whale beached at Gravesend, reeking worse than the old Thames in summer, before Bazalgette built the embankment and diverted the sewage through his maze of brick tunnels. People had come from miles to wonder at the size of the thing. Looking across the black surface, heaving beneath the drifting fog, he shuddered. No, it wasn't old age or too long acquaintance. Lately, a change had come upon the river. Though it was summer, the nights were cold, and though the flocks of swans that greeted ships in centuries past were greatly reduced, they were still occasionally encountered. In the past week, Clarence had seen not one. The hanging lantern swayed with the movement of the boat. The tossed, slurred banter accompanied the near imperceptible dip of the oars. Apparently, the youngest of the 3 had been pickpocketed. "It was her pimp that lifted your wallet," the somewhat older, yellow-vested gentleman said. "She was no prostitute," insisted the hatless youth. His cravat was loose, his slurred syllables testament to his inebriation. His fellows rolled their eyes and shared a knowing look. "I suppose you'll compose a villanelle about her virtue," said the hook-nosed sporting lad. How much did you lose? Said the first, either to distract from the other's tease or to further taunt. 4 guineas. The injured youth presented a pugilistic visage to his mates. The other's low whistle carried in the fog. You could have bought all the whores in the hall for that, Yellow Vest ventured. Not to worry, his dad will replace it, Hook-Nose illumed. I'll not be telling father. I should think not. Chalk it up to experience. Never carry more than you need and always ask for credit. I don't think his girl would take credit. She wasn't my girl. The beleaguered youth was getting annoyed. I should say not. The topic exhausted, the sporting gentleman produced a cigarette case. Smokes were selected, the case returned. Lighting their cigarettes was no mean feat in the damp. Jenkins glanced over his shoulder. The lamps of Temple Pier glowed brighter. Though no more than a dozen yards away, the pier itself remained invisible behind the fog. He was turning the boat when an oar snagged on something. He gave a tug. It wasn't unusual to come upon refuse, rags, dead dogs. Once a half-submerged horse floated past. Whatever it was, the boat stalled and veered back into the channel. What the blazes? What's wrong, Gov? A hand came over the gunwale. The youngest toff screamed. Yellow Vest ill-advisedly stood, rocked the boat, and staggered. Hook-Nose half rose to grab his mate, further upsetting the boat, and Yellow Vest fell into the water. Clarence saw none of this. He was mesmerized by what followed the hand. The face that rose above the gunwale was pocked and noseless, and pale as an alewife's belly. One eye was white as fog. The other was missing. Clarence unshipped an oar and slammed it into the boarder's face. Hand and face disappeared. Yellow Vest was screaming, splashing frantically. The gentleman's hand grasped the gunwale, and his face appeared for an instant, eyes brimming with horror. Then, as if yanked back into the water, he was gone. Fares forgotten, Clarence's hand shook as he tried to return the oar to its lock. Missed, got it. Then he was rowing as if the devil were coming for him. But other hands were on the gunwales, bloated faces glowing in the luminous fog. Beneath a bridge on a cobbled path beside a canal, old Daniel Tobin raised the bottle to the dead and sang into the billowing fog. No more we'll go a-sailing, we'll round the Horn no more. So let's drop the anchor, laddies, and haul the boats ashore. For is Tyburn that awaits me, the mast the gallows tree. The rigging is a single rope, there'll not no sailors be. For is to the tree against the gale that's roaring in my heart. And on the morn haul up the mast, I must this world depart. But spare no sorrows, laddies, drink up while ye may, and sing a capstan shanty, and salute the breaking day. So tip the jug and drink up, boys, and see me on my way, as I shall up the Tyburn mast and dance until I sway. So reef the mainsails, laddies, and haul the boats ashore. The ship will leave at anchor, we'll sail the sea no more. His song done, old Dan drank and smacked his lips, and his gleaming eyes, seeing bygone days, held his bottle high and danced a jig. But the stones were damp, and he slipped and fell with a booming splash, and the water closed over his head. He came up sputtering and rapidly sobering, and reached for the greasy curb. But a hand clenched his leg, and another his belt, and hauled him under, where pale faces grinned. His scream rose in bubbles as they dragged him down. Chapter 2. The knives and belts were out. Will Tagget brandished a big chopper as he circled Bill Drummond. It was all prearranged. Will and his Lambeth Lads had agreed to meet up with the Drury Lane Gang on the Lambeth side of Westminster Bridge, where, as per usual, insults that never failed to provoke were exchanged. And the gangs would give each other what for. The road wasn't so much about territory, a bridge and a river divided them after all, as about bragging rights. Bill Drummond, of the Drury Lane Monkeys, kept his only slightly smaller blade steady, body crouched, elbow bent, his beady eyes watched for an opening. Drummond was a good bladesman. Will gave him that, but Will's grim grin proclaimed he was better. Across the water, the half-hour boomed from Westminster. The clock tower and House of Commons were lost in fog. All that marked the far shore were the lamps of the Victoria embankment. Even here, on the Albert embankment behind St. Thomas, the fog was so thick you could scarcely make out the figures that silently circled and thrust and occasionally hissed as the blade nicked flesh. Will noted with contempt that a couple of the Drury Lane crew wore coats, buttoned to the collar. His boys wouldn't be caught dead wearing armor. They'd showed up in their best shirts, as if on the way to pick up their girls for an evening at the Victoria. Will wore a dark blue neckerchief, neatly knotted, that did duty for collar as well as tie. Save for the scrape of feet, the occasional snick of connecting blades, and the lap of water against the embankment wall, the night was eerily quiet. Bill Drummond swept in low and quick. Will leaned back just far enough to avoid the blade, then, as Drummond's hand withdrew, followed with his own swipe. But Drummond knew what was coming and slipped just far enough right, so the blade missed, and he was in position to take another stab at Will. So the dance went, in earnest now, belt swinging from one hand while the knife hand feinted and stabbed, as serious a task as breaking into a swell's house in an unfamiliar neighborhood. The object was not to snuff your rival. The law didn't take kindly to having to work, but to draw blood. A scream startled them both. Will knew it instantly for one of his, hulking Tim Peck, who was 14 but big for his size and learning the ropes. His first thought was one of the Drury Lane marauders had stuck him. But then he saw the figures shambling up the water stairs. Though it was hard to see in the dim light, the lamp posts were invisible, so the embankment lights seemed to float in the fog like Chinese lanterns. It was obvious something was very out of place. For one thing, the interlopers, there appeared to be 5 or 6 of them, were coming up from the river, and he had heard no dip of approaching oars. For another, they moved with a shambling gait, thick silhouettes bent, heads jutting forward, arms reaching. There was a woman among them. He couldn't make out her face, but she appeared to be hindered by her dress, which clung to her legs as if she had just emerged from the river. The fray abandoned, those nearest the newcomers backed away. Will moved forward, Bill Drummond beside him. "What the deuce?" Will hissed when he saw what had crashed their party. He liked to see fear in others. It caused hesitation, and hesitation was deadly in the heat of action. As for himself, he had outgrown the indulgence at 6, cast it off as impractical and inexpedient. So he was appalled to feel the icy chill of the foreign emotion sluicing through his stomach, the skin on his back crawling. Tim was down. One of the creatures hunched over him, knees straddling his body, mangy head was twisting close to his face. Grisly sounds like soft bones crunching and old wallpaper ripping from plaster reached his ears. Will stopped when he saw through the parting fog what the thing was doing. It was eating Tim, eating him alive. As he watched, for the first time in memory, at a loss for action, the thing shook its head like a mastiff throttling a cat, and a long strip of Tim's face ripped free. Blood from the meat and water from the sopping mane sprayed the air. It threw back its head and wolfed down the meat like a hungry dog. The eyes, rolled back in its head, were white, covered in milky cataracts. As if it sensed his presence, it looked straight at him, and, with a show of bloody teeth, hissed a warning before returning to its hideous repast. The enormity of what he was seeing overwhelmed Will, and for a moment that stretched to eternity, he was like anybody else, reduced to the lowest common denominator of human existence, fight or flight. Terror loosened his knees. He shook off the horror. Deal with that later. A friend was down. Never mind his assailant was something out of a nightmare. He had to be dreaming, couldn't possibly be awake. He started forward, a hand on his arm. Bill Drummond. It should have done his heart good to see Drummond's face as pale as flour, but he didn't have time for the luxury. Tim was bleeding out, if he was even alive. Thank you for listening. Again, I'm Garrett Boatman. I've been reading from Floaters, available from Crystal Lake Publishing this summer.